All right. Forgot to do that, but that's okay. Okay. Well, I was going to say we'll be on chapter 5 again. So we may be good, but we're slow, right? So we'll look at it from a different aspect. Let me get the slides up here. I'm going to try something a little different today. If the internet cooperates, we'll be good. If not, we'll just go on. But anyway, I have the inability to talk and do this at the same time. Let me. Okay. Okay. All right. So last week we did talk about chapter 5, and we were talking about how we had this great party. Belshazzar did, and they. What we look at today is a little bit different point of view. We're talking about mainly wealth and a deception of it. And also, I would say wealth and power. Because kind of two go together. And it would take a with it. So, but last week reminded we had reviewed the story of the blasphemous feast, this big party that Belshazzar threw right while his city was being attacked, probably surrounded. And all of a sudden that message came up on the wall, and the king was absolutely terrified. It says to the point where his knees were knocking, and his countenance changed. Have you ever had that happen to you? As I was looking at the review, I was thinking, have you ever been so afraid that your knees were knocking? You see, can you ever think of a time like that? No?
That worse than your heart pumping really fast.
Yeah, that is for sure. The only time I was trying to remember of an example when we were kids. I guess I was probably about 10 or 12, and folks had the place down at Lake the Ozarks, and they had a lot on the lake. It was an area that we cleared it. There was no water, no power. It was just a lot. We camped out, and my brother and I were left alone. Mom and Dad went to visit some friends a little bit further down the lake, and had our Coleman light on, and we were sitting in lawn chairs in the grass, and I looked down, and there was a couple of copperhead snakes right under my lounge chair. And it was kind of like, my memory is he was reaching up for me, you know. I just remember being terrified. We ran as fast as we could. At first I grabbed a hoe and chopped him into pieces, and then we ran into the. But that's probably the most scared I've ever been. But anyway, the king was absolutely terrified by this hands, and I guess if that happened to us, and you know, when you have the unknown, you hear a strange noise at night in the house, and the hair on your back raises up, you know, and that kind of thing. But it was terrifying for him, but probably more terrifying for him because he knew he had crossed the line by what he had done by bringing out those golden vessels that were dedicated to God in the temple. But anyway, he brought Daniel out. Daniel interpreted it for him, and that was the end. And he died that night. Babylon was defeated. Daniel was promoted quickly for one day until it was over. So the lessons we learned, you know, I jotted some of the things we talked about last week. We are responsible for what we have in the way of knowledge. You know, Belshazzar should have known better. He had seen what happened to his dad to Nebuchadnezzar. He should have known better than what he did. You know, it's not good to blaspheme or mock God. God will not be mocked. Live a serious life. We can party, but life is not a party. Have a clean life. take life seriously, or responsibility seriously. Remember your place, and for sure, don't worship the gods of gold, silver, wood, brick, stone, cars, houses, lakes, whatever, all those things. None of them are important in the whole full scheme of things. So let's look at what Shane Wood has to say in looking at this in regards to wealth.
Who you belong to shapes who you are. Who you pledge allegiance to, who you call master, shapes who you are. In Matthew chapter 22, the answer to the question is almost as interesting to me as the question itself. You see, Jesus is standing in the temple when he is handed a Roman coin, and he is tossed this question: should we pay taxes to Caesar? Now, the interesting thing is that the question really isn't about taxes. It really isn't about wealth. The question is about allegiance. The question is about who you belong to, because taxes in the ancient world was a weapon of subjugation. It was a movement of ownership, that you pay taxes to the one who is your master. And Jesus takes a look at the coin and he asks a question in return. Chapter 22, verse 20, he says, whose image is on this coin? And the crowd kind of looks around, thinks, and finally somebody has the audacity to pipe up in verse 21, Caesar's. It's Caesar's image. In verse 21, Jesus then responds, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what belongs to God. You see, this whole conversation, all of this question is not about taxes. It's not about the money. It's a question about ownership. It's a question about who do you belong to? And Jesus's answer is that whatever bears the image is connected to the one whose image it is to begin with. And that's where Jesus brings up this fascinating text from Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 27. You see, in Genesis chapter 1, God had done some amazing things in creation already. He'd already said, let there be light. He had already gone through 5 days of creating this amazing context with which animals and plants could interact with God. But then on day 6, God created humanity, and he created humanity in the image of God, which is a startling move that the Creator desires to have on some level creation bearing his image. As a matter of fact, whenever God even talks about this in Genesis 1, 26 through 27, he gets giddy. Like my kiddos from a session or two ago, he starts to repeat the same word over and over and over. Genesis 1:26, it says, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And you can almost hear the text say, in his image. That there's something about this movement of God towards us. There's something that makes humanity unique from all of creation. This precious gift of having the image of God emblazoned on us. The image of God impressed on us. And it is a gift that is so precious, that is so profound and so pervasive, that even in Genesis 3, whenever sin comes into the scene, it does not obliterate the image of God in us. Indeed, it covers the image of God with sin and darkness. But inside of all of us, both Christian and not, there is still this image of God that is crying out, that is longing, that is desiring, that is moving toward the one in whose image we were created in the beginning. The image of God in us creates a longing. And what sin is an attempt to respond to this craving with material things. Here's the problem. Those material things will never satisfy this craving for God. No matter how much we try, no matter what we try to dump, the material things are never enough. In Daniel chapter 5, we come face to face with an issue that oftentimes we don't think is connected to identity, but it is actually quite central. We come face to face with the topic of wealth. With wealth. Wealth is not just about money. Wealth is about ownership. Wealth is about identity. Because as Jesus reminds us in Matthew 19, wealth's desire is to become our master, and we cannot serve two masters. So what I want us to do is to have these two poles, wealth and the image of God, framing our discussion of Daniel chapter 5. Daniel chapter 5 begins with a party. Belshazzar is the king. Belshazzar is the son of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is now dead. And King Belshazzar gives this great banquet with thousands of nobles, and he is flowing with wine. Luxurious in his grandeur. But the wine's not enough. So in verse 2, while they're drinking wine, they decide to start bringing out all kinds of gold and silver goblets, and they start to bring in the concubines, and they all start drinking with the nobles. More wealth, but it wasn't enough. So in verse 3, they decide to bring in the goblets that were in the temple of God in Jerusalem, celebrating a victory over a people that has increased their wealth. But here's the problem. It wasn't enough. So then in verse 4, with all of their drinking of the wine, they decided to turn this party into a worship setting for things. It says this, as they drank the wine, verse 4, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. But here's the problem. They're worshiping their master, wealth, but it is never enough. And as this incredibly offensive, this incredibly pagan worship service around wealth is happening, all of a sudden, a human hand appears and it starts writing on the wall. And King Belshazzar, he absolutely freaks out. Verse 6 says, his face turned pale and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. He knew that whatever was happening, whatever message was being scrawled out on the wall, it was being done by a power that was far beyond any of his wealth that he has been celebrating with so far. He is terrified. He is overwhelmed. And so what does the king do? He turns to wealth to deliver him. Verse 7, the king summoned the enchanters and astrologers and diviners, and then he said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Did you see what he did? He's confronted by this terrifying problem, and his solution is to ask his master for help, is to ask wealth to deliver him. If you tell me what this says, I will allow you to worship the master of wealth. But here's the problem. Wealth couldn't deliver. Verse 8, Then all the king's wise men came in, but they couldn't read the writing or tell the king what it meant. And the problem is, this has never happened to Belshazzar before. He's always been able to turn to wealth, and it was always able to deliver him whatever he needed. If he needed an escape from his troubles, he could turn to wealth, because it always gives a temporary high. It always gives a temporary numbness. But now he's faced with an issue that even wealth can't deliver. Verse 9. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled, and so was the king, because wealth had never failed him like this before. And in the midst of this chaos, in the midst of this reckoning, King Belshazzar's queen chimes in and says, "Don't be alarmed," verse 10. "Don't look so pale." She then moves into verse 12 and says this, "Call for Daniel. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means." What would make her think of Daniel? Well, King Belshazzar's dad was Nebuchadnezzar, and this isn't the first time Daniel has had to be called in, and even in this book, in recent memory, in order to give an interpretation that the other wise men couldn't. This happened in Daniel 2. With the dream of the statue. This happened just in the last chapter, Daniel 4, with the dream of the tree, where the wise men could not or would not interpret the dream. And now, once again, Daniel is called in for the third time in the book. And what is really fascinating about this third time is that once again, Daniel is offered wealth. He is offered wealth as his reward. Verse 16. It says, Belshazzar says, "If you can read this, Daniel, if you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain around your neck, and you will be made third highest ruler in the kingdom. I will let you be clothed and embraced by my master wealth." And I love Daniel's answer. Daniel in verse 17 says, "You can keep your wealth." He says, you can keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. The reason why I love that answer is because Daniel understands something that a lot of us overlook. The greatest enigma in this room for Daniel was not the writing on the wall. It was not even, what's going to happen in the future. The greatest enigma in this room is how time and again we can turn to wealth to satisfy our craving, and for it to fail us, only for us to ask wealth to deliver us again. Alcoholics Anonymous defines insanity as repeating the same action over and over and over, expecting a different result. And in a very real sense, a lot of our interactions with wealth demonstrates we're kind of insane, because we turn to material things to satisfy the cravings inside of us that only returning back to God can satisfy. So Daniel looks at him and he says, honestly, keep your wealth. Why? Because it won't deliver. Over the years, pastoring different churches and ministering to students and ministering to ministers, ministering to people in the pews, one of the things I've learned is this: Satan doesn't have to be very creative, because we keep falling for the same tricks over and over and over. He doesn't have to come up with a whole different plan each generation, because each generation falls for the same types of sin: sex, money, wealth. We fall for them over and over and over. And Daniel looks around and he looks at King Belshazzar and he sees them worshiping wealth. And then he has the audacity to offer Daniel wealth as a reward. Daniel says, I'm good. And in verses 18 through 21, Daniel, as you might guess, gets a little rowdy, a little bold. What he starts to do in verses 18 through 21 is he starts to retell King Belshazzar's dad's story. he starts to retell Nebuchadnezzar's story. And a key part of Nebuchadnezzar's story was his arrogance from chapter 4 is propped up by his wealth. That King Nebuchadnezzar had an issue with wealth, a generational sin that now his son Belshazzar has fallen into. And in verse 22, Daniel says this, "But you, Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's son, you have not humbled yourself, though you knew all of this." You know, I'll be honest with you. That's what prophets do most of the time. Like whenever we think of prophets, a lot of times we think of these people that, stare into some weird crystal ball and predict the future. Listen, what prophets do most of the time is this. They talk about the elephant in the room that everyone wants to pretend isn't there. And they refuse to not speak about what is clearly on the table that we want to do anything we can to ignore. The reality is, King Belshazzar knew better. He knew what would happen if you actually bow down and worship wealth. He knew what happened because he watched it happen to his dad. And Daniel looks square at him and he says, "This happened to your dad and you knew it, but you did it anyway." You see, wealth can be toxic. It can be incredibly dangerous. Because wealth is not just about money. Wealth is about identity. Because who you belong to shapes who you are. And if you are in a posture of trusting wealth for all of your problems, if you are in a situation where wealth becomes the center of your stress and of your success, if you are in a situation where wealth is your master, then don't be surprised when you are deeply overrun, when you are deeply overwhelmed, because it cannot satisfy the cravings of your soul. See, when Jesus was talking about taxes, he was talking about image. And whose image is on the coin will ultimately be the image that you are shaped into. But if you are pursuing the image of God emblazoned on you, then you will also be shaped by the one you belong to. Because who you belong to shapes who you are. The question of wealth, then, is not about right or wrong. Daniel understands that the question of wealth is who are you becoming?
What do you think? Interesting perspective, really. I mean, clear perspective, the image tying in the creation and the story of the Roman coin with Jesus and all that. How it ties. Very good. I'll try something here. There was a conversation that I watched recently, and this problem, of course, we're talking about back in Babylonian times, and we recognize it's a current problem. But I just wanted to pick this. This is a conversation between Tulsi Gabbard, and we'll pick a couple of minutes out of this if I can get the internet to work. And it speaks to the modern day manifestation of this same problem, I think. I've got to do a couple of things here.
A newsworthy television show of the year is coming here to TCN. We are not.
It is so incredibly.
I could not, I tried to get this
The top.
in and loaded right into my there we go.
It's a really unfortunate thing that I've seen happen to a lot of people who I've considered friends over the years, who go to Washington, maybe with the best of intentions, to go and serve their constituents and serve the country and actually fix what's broken, but very quickly get caught up in this facade of love and adoration and power. the, I don't know, the first like reception that I went to in Washington, so a couple hundred people there, I went and stood in line to go get a soda or whatever from the bar, and a guy who was standing in front of me looked back and he's like, oh, I was not even sworn in yet. I was a representative elect. He's like, oh, you're a new member of Congress. I said, yeah, nice to meet you, yada, yada, yada. He's like, why are you standing in line? Well, there is a line. I'm going to stand in line and wait for my turn. He said, no, you don't understand. That's not how this town works. You are a member of Congress now, and you will never stand in line again in this town. Struck me as kind of a very strange thing to say. But it was that kind of mentality that I saw very quickly turn people who were cool, friendly, normal, to all of a sudden walking through those halls believing the hype that they were actually so important, that they were above the rest of us, the rest of the little guys. And really how that translates is, oh, what embassy party did you get invited to? Or whose table did you sit at the White House Correspondents' Dinner? It becomes about status and popularity amongst those who thrive in that little corrupt Washington bubble, and they forget about why they're actually there and who they're supposed to be serving. And that's why you get all of these, you get these situations where people think that they know better for the American people than we do for ourselves. And they make these decisions that end up serving their own selfish political ambition and their own self-interest or their own pockets, rather than actually just saying, what's the right thing for the people in this country?
Okay, another little section.
For the people living whether that who are not grounded in a deep sense,
I get it.
it's real. When
Okay.
you have people in a position to make decisions that affect all of us here, and frankly, decisions that will affect the world, who are not grounded in a deep sense of a higher purpose, whether that higher purpose is living a life trying to be pleasing to God, or that higher purpose is, let me dedicate my time and energy every single day as a representative of the people to actually work for the people. If you are not grounded in that purpose every single day, you see how people fall for the little false trinkets that are offered in Washington, and how quickly they lose their way, and how quickly they end up serving the interests of the lobbyists who, give them a lot of money, or whatever it may be, whoever their influence is, whoever it is they're trying to please. They are not actually trying to please the people, and they associate their entire identity with that title that's on the wall, the door to their office. And they're terrified of losing it, because then if they lose that, well, then they think, well, nobody will love me if I don't have this title. Well, what am I going to do? So then, okay, well, I'm going to do whatever it takes to stay in this position of so-called power, because then people will love me, or people will like me, or people invite. It's such a twisted mindset, but you can understand in some ways how people will lose that sense of quote unquote normalness that you're talking about, or that groundedness in your family and in your community and your relationship with God, and you end up chasing all of the wrong things. And the problem is, you're not just harming yourself, you're harming the people of this country, and that is what is unacceptable. You make your own decisions with your own life. Fine, live your own life, but you should not be in a position where you are impacting the lives of the American people when you're really only thinking about yourself.
Amen. I do think,
Anyway, I took those two little clips out of that, thinking that, wow, this is exactly what we're talking about with Belshazzar in Daniel 5 here. It's a problem that probably predates Babylon. Well, we know it goes all the way back to the garden, and it is to today, and we see it. And I know when we were in Washington, I had to be able to firsthand see some people that were in those positions, and there was a thing called, and you probably heard, called Potomac fever. Have you heard of Potomac fever? The Potomac River, of course, goes through Washington, D.C. And the deal is when you drink that water, it goes to your head and you become. So you drink too much of that water, you get Potomac fever and you get enamored with the power and the wealth and all that goes with it there. And that's what we could see people. I mean, I could see people that got it. They came into an administration as a normal person, and pretty soon, like Tulsi Gabbard said, they became enamored with them. So here's a little thing on Potomac fever.
Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. My name is Aaron Blake, and I was just reading the political dictionary. Today's word is Potomac fever. When it comes to DC illnesses, few diagnoses are as contagious as Potomac fever. That's when a politician becomes singularly obsessed with obtaining and then clinging to his or her status in Washington. So why do they call it that? Well, first of all, the Potomac is the iconic river that frames the city of Washington. The phrase is widely thought to have started with President Harry Truman, who used it quite a bit. But in his autobiography, Truman actually pointed to his fellow Democrat and presidential predecessor, Woodrow Wilson, as its rightful author. According to Truman, quote, he said that some people came to Washington and grew with their jobs, but he said a lot of other people came and all they did was swell up. Those that swell up are the ones that have Potomac fever. They're the people who forget who they are and who sent them here. He might have tried to distance himself from the disease, but Truman's DC diagnosis has forever landed Potomac fever on our political dictionary.
So there you have it. So the politicians are a pretty easy target, aren't they? I mean, we kind of beat up on the politicians. And I was going to write something here. We can look at things with the Washington level. So we're looking at it from the US level, United States. But we really need to look at it as the us, US. We need to think of this, okay, it's easy to point our fingers at these guys and not recognize that we can get our own case of Potomac fever. That we can be deceived by wealth and power. How come these things came back? Let me make them go away. How do you mean?
You saw people that do change while they were there. How did you feel about that?
Well, usually I was disappointed. Yeah, I guess I wasn't in a position to call people on it. You know, if I was friendly, they'd say, you know, come on, Pete, you know, you're getting too big for your pants, you know, your hat doesn't fit anymore, you know, or something. Somebody you know, you might, but I wasn't in a position to. It is disappointing, but you can see the transition. And I saw it mainly as the transition from Reagan to Bush and the new guys coming in with Bush, and you knew them at the beginning and you knew them over the next couple of years as they changed. And, you know, some of them got pretty good cases of it, you know. What's that? By me to them?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I was disappointed. Yeah. Yeah. But I kind of think, you know, and it was one of those things that I had to be it made me mindful of trying to be careful not to fall for it. I mean, but we all are in those kind of situations where we can put we can rely on our wealth or our position or whatever. to the extent that that becomes our master rather than going to the Lord. But it's easy, and like Shane Wood was saying in there, Satan doesn't have to be very creative. He used the same playbook, and he has for hundreds and thousands of years, and we all fall for the same things. And the question is, how do we keep that from happening? I was thinking, I took a picture of an image of our money where we say, "In God we trust." And I thought, do we really? In God, do we really trust? I mean, that is kind of isn't it interesting that that's on our money? And we're talking about wealth and all this thing, and printed on our money is "In God we trust." And a lot of times it's in the money we trust. It's not in God we trust. And so maybe it's a reminder. That's what when I was thinking about this, I thought, well, maybe it is, or should be, or could be to us as we pull out the money and just reminding us it's God we need to trust in, not this dollar bill or this $100 bill or whatever it is. I was reminded of Psalm 27, and it says, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord." So I kind of, as I was going through this lesson, I was thinking, I'm going to try to remember the "In God we trust" on the money, to be careful, and a reminder to try to not fall for the thing where I'm going to make money my master and I'm going to worship that rather than God. They tried, haven't they? Oh yeah, there's been attempts to take it off. Yeah, there's a lot of people who don't like that. You know, I was using this verse. The other thing, trying to make it personal in there. This verse is Daniel talking to Belshazzar. Yet you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. But you have risen up against the Lord of heaven, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, and bronze, and iron, and wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or understand. But the God in whose hand your life, breath, all your ways, you have not glorified. And I thought, take this verse, and I put my name in there. It says, "You, his son, Mike, have not humbled your heart, and even though you knew all this." And I'm thinking there's a verse that maybe is a good reminder for us to kind of make it personal and try not to fall in the same trap that Belshazzar fell into in Daniel 9. And just put our names on there.
Do we know what the meaning of the word of his name, Belshazzar, is? Sometimes they tell you what that is.
Bel was the god, was the deity, but I'm not sure what Shazar means. I don't know. Does anybody know that?
This was curious.
Well, that's a good advice. I might have to look it up and then get back with you next week. Yeah, it does. I mean, like the names they gave to Daniel and his three friends had meaning related to. No, this doesn't say. It just has the name, but I'm sure it does. Belshazzar. I don't know. Now I'm curious.
Curious. That's not a homework assignment.
Yeah. It maybe mean like worshiper. What's that, Andrea? Okay. Bel, their God, protect the king. Okay. All right. Well, with that, we can graduate to chapter 6. And here's one. This is the plot against Daniel. And so the question I was thinking that I was going to ask myself, but we can ask ourselves, if praying were illegal, would there be evidence to convict you? So
If you were arrested for being a Christian.
would there be evidence? Yeah, yeah. Well, and this is the case where a familiar story again, where they passed a law that you could only pray to the king, and Daniel kept on praying to the Lord here. So anyway, so we'll do that next week. And anyway, any other thoughts, questions, suggestions? I like what how the approach that Shane Wood takes. It really I listened to him a number of times, and it just kind of, well, that's an insight I hadn't really thought about on that chapter. And the picture, when we talk about the image of God, that is the part where he talked about that is something that really made an impression on me. No pun intended, but it was how it is that we are made in the image of God, and there that image was we're trying to that void is shaped like that image of God. It reminds me a lot of our stories we probably. Yeah. Okay. Terry, would you mind closing for us this morning?
Most gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your word as it's been taught today. We thank you for the consistency of your word, that if we want examples or proofs of what we're reading, all we have to do is look at your word, and the examples and proofs are not only evident, but they're also many. Lord, we thank you again for everyone who has been able to gather here either in person or by Zoom. We ask you to go with us into the worship service this morning. Give Pastor Jeff the boldness he needs to preach the word as you give him in an uncompromising way. And Father, may we always remember that it is in God who we trust. Father, thank you so much. And as always, my prayer is to someone see, hear, feel, or experience Jesus in each one of us today. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, good seeing. Thanks, everybody. Okay. We will see you all next week.
Okay.
All right.